And we are recording. Mr. Kevin Kelly, welcome to the World Class Dads podcast. Happy to have you here.
It's my pleasure to be here. I am so glad you invited me.
It's been a conversation I've been looking forward to ever since we set this up. I first heard your name back years ago on the Tim Ferriss show,
Right.
and then again on the Tim Ferriss show, and then started following along with some of the other cool things that you've been up to. And so this is an honor to be chatting with you about fatherhood here today.
Okay.
Well, let's start with the basics. How many kids do you have, and what are their ages?
I have 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. My oldest daughter is 32 and married. My second daughter is 30. She's a digital nomad. And my son is 6 years old. So he just turned 23, I think, or maybe 24. And he's in Seattle, and he's a tech guy. And we text all day long, the two of us. So I'm in constant contact with him. We share some interests, and so that's really nice.
Yeah, I was going to say with the tech stuff, the apple
Right.
didn't fall far from the tree there. Well, so with those ages, and knowing that you co-founded Wired magazine in '93, you were kind of right in the thralls of young kids, one not born yet, as you founded that. Is that correct?
Right. And Wired got up to, I think it was close to a couple hundred people at a point where I was the only one with a kid.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was just a company with hundreds and hundreds of employees, and I was the only one who had kids, because it was all, kids out of college mostly, who were inventing the web. So I was the old guy, and I had, young kids. A lot of people remember them because I would bring them into the office whenever I could, my 2 daughters, and they would open my mail for me. It was a big treat. Just open packages of mail.
I love that.
So it was in the thick of Wired, and I was writing a book at the very beginning of Wired while launching Wired, and had two young kids. And that was, my wife works full time.
So you guys had quite a bit going on. I love that you mention all of that, because I think that sometimes there's a notion that when you are having kids, it's kind of this phase of life where you have to step back from a lot of the projects or passions or things that you're working on. Clearly, that was not a time you were stepping back from anything.
No.
So what was your mindset in that time? Or could you just kind of talk a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah, I mean, in retrospect, it was probably not the wisest thing to do. They kind of cascaded on each other. It just seemed like we should do those things. Like, basically I took a sabbatical from the magazine that I was running, Whole Earth Review, to write the book. And then this other magazine came along in the meantime. And so, the logic and discussion about, whether to take on these projects were more of, I think Jeff Bezos called it some kind of regret clause. It was like the regret of not doing it would sit higher than the regret of having something bad or the worst case scenario happen. So there was a higher regret index for not taking advantage of those opportunities. And that kind of went out. And so, the kid thing, in some sense, you don't have that much control over, having kids and getting them and when they come and stuff. And so we were happy just to have them and be able to do that. So I'm not making a very good answer. I would say we kind of muddled through it. It wasn't as maybe deliberate as it looks right now. Like a lot of things.
That seems to be kind of a general theme that I'm coming across in these interviews that we're doing. And it's that there are these seasons of life, and when the kids are young and life is chaotic at home, and especially amongst high achievers who are still going pedal to the
Right.
metal in their professional lives, they survive it, they thrive, but they don't always remember it. But it's just an exciting time of life. But it seems that that's a common theme, that um, those high achievers who also are very dedicated to being there with their family, not just
Yeah,
with it for a paycheck, but present. They make it work, but there may be sacrifices in other aspects of life that
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I was very present. I was home for dinner for most nights. I didn't, I mean, I would work at home, but I wouldn't like miss dinner so much. I didn't have a lot of travel at that time. It was one thing that I would say that made it maybe doable is that I was not traveling. I was home every night. So that's a huge difference. Later on in my life, when the kids got older, I started to do more business travel. And that's a very different dynamic. But at that early years, I was home. So that was, and my wife was home too. And we had help. So my wife is from Taiwan. She's Chinese, and we found through advertising in the local Chinese newspaper, we found a woman who would, uh, when the kids were in school age, when they were later on and they were in school, who would pick the kids up from school and come home and cook during the week.
mm,
And that was honestly the thing that made the whole scheme work with my wife working full time. Picking up kids after school. It's like that's, you know, how do we? Neither of us could leave our work to do that. So,
right.
so that was the thing that paying for that, having that person who was very reliable and was always there was really the thing that made it possible for us to both hold jobs and have the kids as well.
Have you found that in life that there tends to be, or maybe it was just this situation, but that kind of one thing, that
Yeah,
one key element that makes everything else possible?
yeah, yeah. And you know, we weren't rich by any means. I was working at Whole. I was working at $10 an hour. That was my um, oh well. I changed. I just changed to Wired. So I had been working at $10 an hour. Wired was, I forget what it was, but it wasn't a lot. I mean,
Hmm.
our bet was in the startup of the company and the ownership of the stock. It wasn't a salary because we weren't making very much money in the very beginning. So so this was a stretch for us. I maybe that's what I'm saying. Is this going out and hiring someone like that was a huge stretch because we also had daycare too. And so but you're right that there was that one kind of, it's like you're investing, you're kind of taking a leap, you're saying, yeah, it doesn't make sense, but it makes all these other things work, so we're going to give that a try and do it. And it was probably one of the smartest things we did.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's awesome to hear. And you also mentioned, so you mentioned travel and
Yeah.
traveling for work. I know just in researching for this conversation that travel's been a big part of your life. You spent a lot of time, overseas, all around the world, in China. I'm here in Ohio. I know you've spent some time here with some of the Amish folks that are in our backyard.
Hmm.
Um, how has travel impacted your perspective in terms of family and being a
Yeah.
dad?
um yeah, there's probably a lot to say. I would say one thing that I was a rolling stone traveling and for a lot until I moved to California, and then I kind of gave it a break. I call myself, I graduated, I said.
Hmm.
And then, so I didn't travel almost anywhere in the 80s. I mean, like almost, I don't think I went anywhere in the 80s um, until the very end of the 80s. Okay. So it took a decade off of traveling where I kind of decided to, start a career,
Hmm.
buy a house, get married, buy a house, maybe start to have a family. and I didn't travel, and I didn't travel even for business. So I was very much at home. Then as the kids got older and stuff, we started to travel with them, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what I would kind of talk about, traveling with kids, which is really fantastic. Um, but overall, before that, well, I think uh, what I learned was that you can travel with kids. I mean, so even though I didn't have it, I saw plenty of people who were doing round the world trips or just riding bikes along the California coast or whatever it was. There were plenty of people that I met who would travel with kids, and they loved it. And so the message I got was, this is not only doable, but this was going to be a good thing. So even though I did take a break during the formative years. Later on, we traveled with kids even when they were young, and it's a challenge. There's extra stuff. There's new kinds of problems, but the benefits were great. And I had one trip that I did while I was must have been after Wired. I traveled to China for the first time. I'd never been able to go to China during my first round because it was closed. And after China opened, this was in the mid 90s. Mid 90s. I must have still been at Wired. Okay. I was still at Wired. I must have taken some time off from Wired because it took a month, and uh, went to China with my two girls who were bilingual with Chinese, and we went to some very very remote places in Tibet where they didn't even have bathrooms, and for
Wow.
girls in America not having a bathroom, this was a big leap. You got to go out
Oh,
and
I could imagine.
right, and so I was a little concerned. There were two of them. They were, I think, 10 and 12, or no, 10 and 8, maybe 8 and 10. And they spent a lot of the time kind of playing cards with each other, not looking out the window as we're going across these amazing vistas. We get to the hotel, they didn't kind of really want to go out of the hotel very much. It was a little kind of intimidating, and Tibetan people are kind of big and close. They don't have a sense of distance with you. And I was feeling by the end of the trip that it was kind of like a total disaster because it was like they're not really paying attention to it
Not
and
taking what you were
not
hoping they
taking it
might.
in and not really kind of really trying to absorb it and all this stuff. And so, but it turned out that I was wrong. And what happened was they needed many, many years older to process what happened and what was going on. And that trip has become more important to them as they've gotten older.
So how did that kind of manifest, or how did you come to that realization? Is it just
Well,
down the
just
road conversations about
right,
it?
right. Hearing them talk about it and what it meant, and they were kind of obviously paying a lot more attention to it than I thought, and they, have processed and kind of fitted in, and so it was meaningful to them in ways that I didn't see at the time. And so that's one of my pieces of advice: is if you are traveling with your kids, and your kids don't seem to be appreciating
Mm-hmm.
the travel, don't worry about it because it actually is affecting them. It actually is having a huge influence on them, but they don't even realize it yet.
Do you have a opinion on what kind of travel is the most influential on kids or can be the most impactful? And I
Well,
ask because we just see, I mean, obviously this year's not a
right.
great year for family travel,
Sure.
but families who they're going to the same resort on Myrtle Beach year in and year out. That's their version of travel versus some going, backpacking Europe or doing some of these
Right, right,
trips
right.
to the South America, things like that.
We did evolve something that I think is useful, and that is we travel around passions rather than destinations.
Mm.
So our son, when he was tiny, was really into dinosaurs. So we said, okay, we'll make a dinosaur trip. We're going to rent an RV and we're going to drive around to all the dinosaur digs in the West and watch them digging for dinosaurs. And get to talk to the experts, the actual people who were, and we were there. We were there we found, some guy and the site, and they were digging up dinosaur bones, and they handed one to us and said, here, take this one.
Wow.
So we've done that in other cases. So we travel around passions rather than destinations. So each kids have a turn about something they're interested in, and we'll travel around that, going to it, and we'll figure out something, and we'll feed that passion. And that's actually a good idea for adults as well. Travel around passions rather than destinations.
Yeah, no, I love that concept.
Somebody who's interested in, I don't know, in cheeses or whatever, or they're some kind of weird model railroad, so you make a little thing about that, and that is really fantastic.
Yeah, because then you're really leaning into the experiential side of it,
Right.
With something is going to be a home run right off the bat. So a big piece of your career, especially with Wired and a lot of the books that you've authored, has been looking towards the future, and especially around technology. And I'd say those are two topics that give parents a ton of anxiety in general. So you've kind of just dove headfirst into it. What has your perspective been around technology, especially as it relates to your family and as your kids were growing up and integrating technology in the household?
Right. So our household never had TV, still doesn't. Our kids grew up without TV. And the rule was we don't have TV. If they went to a friend's house, they could watch whatever it is. It was just that. And this is a really good argument that seems to really work, was that our family does not do this, or our family does this. And for kids growing up, that is actually usually sufficient reason. So we have lots of things that our family does this. We say grace before, this is what our family does. We have a Sabbath and we don't do this. That's what our family does. And one of the things that our family didn't do was have TV. But as an early adopter, I was one of the first ever to have Netflix, right? And so we had the internet very early on. We had a high connection, so they grew up with the internet. And of course, Netflix wasn't streaming; it was the discs.
Sure.
But so we had Netflix, and we could watch a lot of stuff, but it was on demand. It was in our control. It was in our, on our schedule, and all these other issues. So it wasn't that they didn't see movies or Disney stuff. It was just that there was a control of it. And what they didn't see were any commercials.
Sure.
Because I have a kind of a funny story when my oldest girl, Kylene, was, I have to say, maybe she was like in kindergarten or something. We had VHS at that point. So we had borrowed from someone VHS tapes of some Disney movies, cartoons. And she came in, I put it in, she came in and said there was a program inside her program. I said, what? So I went to look, and it was a commercial. She'd never seen a commercial. There's a program inside my program. And so we had a teaching moment about what it was and what it was trying to do and why it was there.
Oh man, there's a lot of people out there who spend good portions of time trying to figure out how to avoid commercials and ads altogether. And so you had it nailed down pretty early.
And later on in life, our kids have all thanked us for not having TV growing up. These days, I'm not sure what we would do about screens. iPads are pretty cool. Babies like iPads. They can immediately figure them out and do all kinds of stuff. I don't have social media on my phone. That's one of the ways that I am comfortable with social media, because it's not on my phone. It's on my desktop. And so I can manage it without issues. we might do something like that if I was having to have young kids now. Maybe they have social media, but it's not on their phone. I don't know. I have friends, and I've asked my friends, and there's a huge range of different approaches.
Hmm.
From like they don't get a smartphone until they're 16. There's Tiffany Slane and her whole Sabbath thing, which I think we would also endorse, which you have one day, 24 hours every week where there's no screens at all, and that works absolutely. And you can usually get buy-in even with teenage kids. Um, and so yeah, so I haven't had to figure that out for this current time,
Hmm.
but I think we would have some version of, we would have some limits and controls for sure.
Is the digital or technology Sabbath something that you implement or that you've done in your own life, and
Yeah,
not even with just the social media, but just in
yeah,
with technology
uh-huh,
in general?
yes.
And what have the benefits been with that
Oh, it's
for
huge,
for
huge,
you?
huge, huge. There is, and by the way, I recommend you find Tiffany's book called 24/6, I think,
Okay, we'll have that linked up in the show notes.
um, which she does a really great job of kind of putting it on context, talking about, and her own experience and other people's like it. Um, the major thing that you get out of it is that it's like sleeping and dreaming. You get this renewal that's very, very, very powerful. Um, you it's like recharging your batteries. You can come back with renewed vigor and appreciation of the very thing itself. This is unlike this idea that it's toxic. No, no,
Hmm.
no. We're not talking about something that you're detoxing. That's the wrong metaphor. This is a Sabbath where you're taking a break of something good in order to make it better.
Mm,
Okay. And so it's not that the work is bad. The work is great. It's good. It's what we live for in some senses, but we're taking a break so that we can come back with renewed energy, renewed perspective. So you get perspective when you do that. You come out. You also get to do other cool stuff like draw in your sketchbook or write in your journal or go climbing a mountain. It forces in some ways you to explore other avenues, which are very, very powerful. Um, and there is also, in terms of a family, there's kind of, part of often you can use that time to do family group things. So you can have
absolutely.
a renewed family bonding kind of a thing. And so here's where you get that time to do that you may not have when everyone's on a screen and or whatever when everyone's working. And so there is also um, I mean, I'm a huge believer in taking time off in general and sabbaticals and vacations because I think that is often where you get your best ideas and when
Mm,
you get your best ideas. And so, as a creative process, I think it's essential that you waste time, that you goof around, that you have no agenda, that you play. And this is another form of doing that where it's a time when you might have some of your best ideas come to you. And so, as a creative person, it's very, very powerful in taking that kind of break on a regular basis.
when in your one of your conversations with Tim Ferriss that I mentioned, you brought up this concept. I think it was called premature optimization,
Right.
for which, from my recollection, was the idea that at younger and younger ages now, there's kind of this focus or pressure to be more and more productive. And your argument was that that can have detrimental effects, um, or can be unproductive to creativity and things like that. Could you just share a little bit about that concept? And um, I was fascinated by it, but also then how you can help your kids to avoid that.
Yeah. the idea, the concept of premature optimization is a broad idea that's useful in many contexts, including, say, entrepreneurial or business contexts where you are prematurely optimizing something when it's not the right thing to optimize. And that's, in short, what the thing is like, um, I'll tell you another metaphor. So Peter Drucker, the famous management consultant guru, talked about the fact that for a lot of workers in the old days, the assignment was to do the job right. And the assignment of the executive, so to speak, was to make sure they were doing the right job. So, because if you're optimizing the wrong job, you're going backwards. And his point in this one was that in the knowledge economy, everybody's now doing the executive function. That when the more freelance you are, the more of a free agent you are, the more you have to make sure you're doing the right thing, not just doing the right thing well, but that you're doing the right thing. And so that's true in life as well, that we have more and more tools to help us to optimize things, but the tools and the skills for deciding whether we're doing the right thing that we want to optimize is much trickier and difficult and less common. And so as we go through life, it becomes easier to optimize things, but it becomes sort of more difficult to make sure that we're optimizing the right things.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, I may be misattributing this to Stephen Covey, but a personal development author at some point in time used the metaphor of, if you're going to climb the ladder of success, make sure that the ladder is leaning against the right wall.
Exactly.
So that's what
Exactly
it reminds me
the
of.
same metaphor, the same image. And so that process of picking the hill you're going to climb or the wall you're going to climb is requires, well, it benefits from wisdom, from context, from experience, from taking a wider view. And a lot of those things can come on a sabbatical or vacation, goofing around, playing Sabbaths, things like that.
Yeah, no, I love that concept, because I feel like in today's day and age, especially with kids, there's this focus. You see it even in kids sports, where it used to be play everything, find out what you're interested in, and continue to do that until maybe you get really good at one, or you realize what you want to chase. Whereas now it's like, you specialize in this, go to tennis camp all summer long from the age of 5 and get super good at tennis.
Right.
But you might end up being 15 and realize you're good at tennis, but you don't like it that much.
Right.
And that's just kind of the world of sports. But I feel like that's also could be the case in many areas of life, if we're not careful with what our kids are doing, and we're not letting them explore and have that time to discover themselves.
Sure.
So is there anything that you did with your kids? Because you said you had that period early on in life where you're traveling a lot, you were goofing around, and you were just figuring yourself out. Is there any ways that you encouraged your kids to do that as well, and to really discover themselves and not fall into that premature optimization trap?
Yeah. We were the opposite of helicopter parents. We were very, or even in college, my girls complained that we went to the college twice, once to leave them there, and second was on graduation day to pick them up. I didn't really attend any sports events during high school. We were too busy. And again, I wanted them to kind of, do that on their own. So we, in general, were pretty hands off of them, and let them kind of roam and make mistakes and stuff. But yeah, I saw my job as kind of like to expose them to as many possibilities as they were interested in. We weren't really trying to push too hard to get them. If they didn't really want to play piano, well, we give it a try, as
Hmm.
far as they can until they just decided that that's not for them. So, um, that's, you're always torn as a parent between um, letting them uh, having help them learn, perseverance, grit, kind of, sticking through and following through.
Right.
At the same time, um, letting them explore as many different things as they can. So there is a tension between those two as a parent, and you're not always sure that you got the right combination, the right mix of those.
Sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier your like taking a sabbatical or taking time and spending that with your children, maybe a weekly Sabbath, and just having that time as a family.
Uh-huh.
I'm curious, were there any family traditions, whether it be an annual or a weekly thing or something that
Yeah.
you had implemented in your family that
Right.
paid dividends?
Yes, and if I had any regrets, it was that we didn't do more of them.
Mm,
Um, I don't know what I was thinking, but we should have done tons more because the kids just love that. They just love this. So we had simple things like I cooked pancakes every Sunday morning,
mm.
rain or shine, no matter what. Pancakes on Sunday morning. And that just became like a huge thing. It was just like, even now, it's like there's something about that weekly tradition. It's meaningless at some level, and it's only important because we always did it.
Right.
And um, I know other families who do other things, and there are a couple other little things that we did on regular basis, and annual Christmas stuff and stuff like that. But we should have done ton more because they're cheap, they're not expensive, they're simply a matter of making it into a tradition and kind of
Hmm.
calling it that. And um, yeah, if I had to do it over, that's one thing I would do differently. I would have a ton more of meaningless family traditions.
I love that. Are there any other things looking back on that you wish you would have done differently or done more of when it comes to
Yeah,
the
it's a
kids?
fair question.
And it's all right if the answer's none that you could
No,
think
no,
of
no.
because it's a broad one.
There's a couple of like discipline tricks that we learned late. I wish we had learned earlier. There was one little trick um, that we got, and we probably didn't have it until maybe later in the second kid. But it's a trick for. There's a bunch of philosophers, I guess, particularly coming out of Christian church circles, that you wanted to have not a child-centered family, but to not have your whole lives ruled by children's and their appetites and their interests.
Mm.
Excuse me for
That's all right. Half the time it's mine during these conversations, so not a problem.
Claudia, could you close the bedroom door? Jameen left, and so he's upset that she left. My wife. It's not our dog; it's our daughter's dog that we're dog sitting. So I don't have full control over the dog.
I completely understand that. We're in the family dog sitting circle as well. So
Um, um, uh, I was describing. Remember what was I describing?
there was a disciplinary
Yeah,
or
right. And so the trick was oftentimes kids want to interrupt their
Mm,
parents, and they and the parents may be talking to other adults, and there is a sense in which the kid is over and across the room and saying something and demanding to know or whatever it is, and that conversation is being interrupted. So the policy that we introduced, which really works, is that we would not acknowledge, or we would not interrupt our conversation or even acknowledge them unless they came over and squeezed our hand
Hmm.
with silently. And if we squeezed back, that meant that we heard them and that they had to wait until we were going to break or make a break.
Yeah.
And so what would happen is we'd be talking, whatever it is, and they would come over, hold the hand, and we would squeeze the hand, and then that would be a signal. So then I could say, when I finished whatever I was saying, I would say, "Excuse me, I want to talk to whatever it is." And it's like, "What do you want? What is it?"
Right.
Then they would have their thing. Well, whatever it was. Okay. So that was huge in terms of like bringing order to the craziness. So they weren't, and that would extend to if they wanted our attention and didn't have it, they couldn't just scream across the room or whatever it is and
Sure.
demand to be, they'd have to wait until we gave them attention. And that was a big thing. And I wish we'd figured that out earlier.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that. That's an awesome one. Um, are there any challenges specific to fatherhood that you kind of had to overcome, or looking back on, you realize you faced and helped you grow in
Yeah,
fatherhood or in
good
life in
question.
general?
I had, my parents were very loving and kind and generous. And so I didn't have my father and I did not get along when we were teenagers. I am one of 5 kids. I have 3 brothers. We're four boys. Some of my brothers were closer to my father than I was, but in general, um, my father was a pretty good role model. And so I didn't feel like I was needing to work out too many things. When I was a father, I was, probably doing lots of things that my father had done. Um, I'm trying to think if there was an epiphany. Well, I will say, just in general, that before I had kids, um, I wasn't really interested in kids.
Mm.
And the Jedi mind trick of like a kid in a commercial and all that did not work on me. I was
Hmm.
completely immune to stories of kids needing kids and stuff. It just didn't even register on me. And then that immediately changed when I had kids, and suddenly, like, I was completely susceptible. I would weep at a commercial, kid in it. It was like something happened
Yep.
where I was suddenly very sensitive and very aware and very attuned. And it was like, wow, I was not expecting this at all. So there was almost like a switch. And now that our kids are kind of out of the house, I've lost some of that, but my wife is still very sensitive, and she sees that with like grandkids, little kids. She's completely there again. And I've kind of maybe grown out of that again. But that was something I was not expecting. And, maybe it's evolutionary, biological. I don't know what it was, but it definitely caught me by surprise.
Yeah, no, that same exact thing happened to me. I recall when we brought our daughter home from the hospital, she must have been 1 or 2 weeks old, and we were just, part of
Yeah.
this could have also been sleep deprivation, but
Sure.
we were sitting in bed and I was reading one of the kids' books about I love you to the moon and back or whatever it is. And I've never cried this hard in my life, to the point where I'm bawling. I'm just weeping my eyes out. And I look over, my wife's crying because I'm crying. And this baby's just like laying in between us, like, what,
Yeah.
what the hell is going on? Nobody's even looking at me through it. They're all this waterfall of tears.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that may be a universal
Yeah.
phenomenon.
Yeah. So other kinds of insights or epiphanies. Um, I well, I think I'll probably say things that many people will say, which is that in kind of a curious way, I think we have enjoyed the kids more and more as I've gotten older. I mean,
Mm.
and now that they're adults, it's, your relationship is constantly evolving. So now we have to relate to them as adults, and that's been lovely as well. Um, and so the kind of the gifts never end. And we've been lucky with our kids. None of them have been in jail, so we consider ourselves successes.
Yeah, there you go. I
So,
would consider that success as well.
yeah. So
Look, I guess looking at that question even from another angle, if you were to get the question from a new dad, maybe it's your son down the road asking for if there's any advice that you give to
yeah,
them right off the bat in those, those early
yeah.
days
Well,
of fatherhood, is there any wisdom you'd impart?
I do have one bit of unsolicited advice I've been giving to people, uh, and it's a little bold, but I say, have as many kids as you possibly can have,
Mm,
that you will never regret having more kids. And it's difficult, and for many reasons, in many ways, but that's was our experience. And again, going back to regrets, I regret that we didn't have more, because it would have been a lot more fun. And so yeah, so that's, it's not easy to do, but you won't regret it.
yeah. No, I love that. And so one other area that I've got to ask you about, since you are so plugged into the technological world, um, and have just played around and tinkered with so many different tools. So I guess this could be technological or not, but are there any resources or tools that you see out now, could be things that have been around forever, that you would recommend to parents or to dads as they shepherd their children,
Mm.
through this crazy world?
Glue guns.
Mm, why is that?
Well, you can do so many things with glue guns. Um, yeah, I'm a big fan of doing things with your kids and having
Hmm.
them make stuff with them. Um, I think it's good for the kids, good for the dad, and our kids have very good memories, and I think maybe even some skills from those times of making stuff and making things happen. Um, it's a very, it's kind of better than a vacation. I mean, it's kind of like in some ways, I would say a cheap way to really have kids engaged. I also will say that I homeschool our son for 1 year in the 8th grade, and without a doubt, and I think he would agree, it was one of the best years of his life. Um, and all we did was make stuff. That was
Mm.
my curriculum. We're gonna we're gonna make stuff, and stuff that I've always wanted to make, and new things. And so we would do things like make a map of the neighborhood. Okay, we're gonna map the neighborhood, make a map.
Yeah.
There's so many things that you can pile on top of lessons on top of that, from trigonometry to drawing to what's happening in the neighborhood. I mean, it's just like that one project alone could just be so many things. But we did so many other stuff too, including some travel. And so one of the things that COVID has kind of brought home to people is that, hey, you are homeschooling.
Yep.
And there's advantages and disadvantages, but there's a lot to be said for that. And my solution was to use that project-based learning, and making stuff. So if you're making things, get a glue gun. glue guns you can use it for sewing, by the way. So but people don't know that you can make costumes that you don't have to sew. You glue the fabric together.
Oh, all right.
You can use it for cardboard. Those Amazon boxes are incredible resources when you glue them up into all kinds of things. Um, yeah, a glue gun.
I love it. I love it. So everybody, all the dads go out, get a glue gun. It's
Yep.
probably a lot less dangerous than a nail gun. So a good starting point for sure.
Right, right. And when you're working with glue gun the kids, the thing about it, when they get glue on their skin, it will burn. But what you do is you rub it really fast.
Mm,
That's the solution. Is if hot glue gets on the skin, rub it really fast, and it will not burn.
diffuse it real quick.
Yep.
There we go. That didn't know we were going to get the Kevin Kelly exclusive on that one,
Cool
but I'm
tools.
glad
Yeah.
we did. Yeah, cool tools. Um, any other nuggets of wisdom that you would like to impart upon dads, young dads,
Yeah,
especially dads who are ambitious in terms of they have projects they want to accomplish, they have, you know, professional things they want to do, but not necessarily well, definitely not at the expense of their families.
yeah. Um, you know, my dad worked for a magazine, a company. He didn't work for the magazine itself. He worked for a magazine company, and he used to talk about his work. And I learned so much about how things worked from him talking about his own work at the
Hmm.
dinner table. Um, and I tried to talk about, you know, things that I was interested in working on with my kids as a way of, you know, being with them and helping them to understand, you know, what I was doing, although they didn't really understand it. But I think it was helpful. You know, I did bring them to work too, a lot. Partly because, you know, may have to pick them up because the sitter couldn't, so we take them to work, and they enjoyed that and seeing where I worked, and their mom as well. So I'm not sure I have anything profound to suggest with that, other than uh, I think if you're ambitious, if you can have projects with your kids, working together with your kids, I think is maybe, you know, the thing. And I have other friends, and one of them has 5 kids, and very ambitious, somebody you probably know, and or have heard of. And they did projects all the time. So it wasn't, maybe they didn't have a family business,
Mhm.
but they had family projects. And so he had 2 jobs. You know, he had his main job and he had his other jobs with his kids. And I think, I mean, his kids have done great. And I think that might have been part of that thing. So I think, like, working with your kids, if you're a work oriented person, then think about working with your kids even when they're small.
That's beautiful. Uh, Kevin, where can people find out more about you? What projects are you working on right now? I know you've always got new, exciting, cool
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
coming out.
So I have just finished making a huge book of oversized coffee table size book, bigger than a coffee table, that has almost 1,000 pages. It's called Vanishing Asia, and it's a document of my exploration of Asia and capturing of things that are disappearing
Hmm.
very quickly. The old ways, from celebrations, costumes, festivals, architecture. And those 9,000 images have 9,000 captions. But that book has been kind of delayed and won't be out until 2021, later. And in the meantime, I have a Instagram account where I flash one picture a day from the book. It's called at Vanishing Asia.
Okay.
And generally, people can find me at my initials, kk.org. But we have a newsletter called Recommendo, which recommends 6 brief briefly recommend 6 things on in a one pager every Sunday morning of cool stuff that we like, people to follow, things to read, stuff to watch, tools to use, whatever we are recommending in a very broad way. We put into this one page newsletter called Recommendo, which is free. Sign up for that. And lastly, we do a podcast, weekly podcast with cool tools, where we have a remarkable person tell us about 4 of their favorite tools. So that's a lot. I think you find something there.
Yeah, there's a little bit of something for everybody there.
Right.
And we'll have that all linked up here in the show notes. But Kevin, honestly, I really appreciate you coming on. It was just a pleasure to hear from your experience and some of the wisdom and some of the things that you've picked up over the years with your kids. So thanks for being here, and thanks for
that. Thanks for asking. I really enjoyed your questions. I had a lovely conversation and a lot of fun. And my best to you on your own fatherhood.